Monday, 9:03 a.m. The Zoom link was the same, the background slightly changed. Someone swapped their wallpaper for a Miami beach, another used blur, and some just sat there with a let's get this over with face. I poured my coffee 2 minutes before the call, Saturday down. Opened my dashboard, and as always, decided to ask a question. We had our weekly sustainability sync, a meeting about green initiatives where everyone spoke smoothly, confidently, corporately, but rarely got to the point. For a couple of weeks, I'd noticed something odd. The reports showed consistently high expenses on the Green Start Alliance initiative, about $1.2 million per quarter, but with no concrete results. No metrics, no case studies, no feedback from beneficiaries, just the line, operational and outreach expenses. So my hand reached for the microphone, and as always, politely but directly, I said, "Hi everyone, I have a quick question regarding the Green Start allocation. I noticed that our Q1 spending hit $1.2 million again. Do we have a breakdown of that outreach? Like where exactly those funds are being deployed?" Pause. Silence. I saw someone avert their eyes. Someone pretended to search for a tab. Then Zach's voice. He leads the ESG division at our company Blue Stitch Tech, based in Chicago. A charismatic manager, a charmer, always in a Patagonia vest with a slight smirk. He chuckled and said, looking into the camera, "Alicia, you're not in Congress. Let's move on." At first, silence, then laughter, different kinds. Someone giggled quietly, someone covered their mouth. Someone smiled with that tension you see when you don't know whether to laugh or pretend you didn't hear. And I just smiled, slightly, microscopically, because inside me something clicked. Not loudly, not tragically, but clearly. You just asked a question. You didn't accuse, didn't confront, just asked a question, and the response comedy. They call it a synchronization, but more and more it feels like a script. Phrases like mantras, reports like theatrical props, smiles like masks. No one really wants to know what works and what doesn't. The main thing is to look like everything's going according to plan, even if that plan is smoke and mirrors. I muted my mic, left the video on, and just listened. How they talked about KPIs, outreach metrics, abstract impact initiatives, and one thing stuck in my mind: $1,200,000 in 3 months. But where to? For what? To whom? I used to work at a small environmental NGO in Madison, Wisconsin. There, $10,000 was a victory. People accounted for every dollar. And now I'm sitting in a big tech company that burns millions on green projects every quarter and doesn't even bother to explain how. Zach's sarcasm didn't bother me. What bothered me was the reaction of the others. Like I really crossed a line, like asking a question was an act of unethical behavior. That same evening, I got a message from Lorena, a colleague from a neighboring team. "Hey, I saw what happened today. I think your question was valid. Just be careful. This place doesn't love friction." Friction, yes, I guess I caused some. But if you can't ask, where's the $1.2 million going? Then this isn't a sync. It's a stand-up, without a punchline. I closed my laptop, took out my notebook, wrote the date, and next to it, the first public question, the answer a joke, laughter nearby, silence inside. Tomorrow, I'll ask another one. A year ago, I moved to Chicago from Madison. Before that, I worked at a nonprofit focused on waste recycling and school education. The budgets were small, but the work was real. We saw how every action impacted people. I believed in the mission. And that small steps could make a difference. When I saw the opening for an ESG analyst at Blue Stitch Tech, a big tech company with ambitions and a sustainability department, my heart raced. This is it, I thought. Finally, resources, influence, scale. Everything to make real change, not just chase grants. At my first interview, they asked me, "Why do you want to leave nonprofit?" I answered honestly, "I believe in data, and I want to scale impact. I'm not here to decorate reports, I want to track what works and what doesn't." They hired me. The first couple of months, I was like a kid in a Lego store. We had Tableau, access to internal databases, an ESG dashboard, dozens of presentations about carbon offset and partnerships with green funds. I dug deep. created pivot tables, made Power BI charts, cross-checked quarterly report numbers with what was actually reaching the projects. And then it began. Many numbers just didn't add up. Partnerships were announced but not officially formalized. Greening servers' efficiency metrics in Miami were copied from a pilot project in Seattle. Millions were spent on environmental consulting, but the firm receiving those funds shared an office with an investment advisor to one of the VPs. I went to Lorena a bit older, had worked there a long time, and seemed sincere. I said, "I'm trying to reconcile Q2 spending with actual implementation. Something doesn't align." She looked at me for a long time, then sighed. "You're new. You still believe it's all about the numbers." That evening, I walked home along the loop past offices still lit up, past cafes filled with people like me, laptops open and hope alive. I thought, maybe I'm naive. Maybe it's all just a facade. ESG as marketing, sustainability as slide decoration. But inside, I still held on to this. If you speak with facts, they'll listen. If you argue, show, explain, even in big systems, there's room for logic. It can't all be just pretty words. I started tracking everything. Kept a spreadsheet, project, promises, budgets, results. Not to report anyone. For myself. To understand, am I wrong? Or is there really a problem? After a month, I noticed something strange. The same report appeared under different dates with identical numbers. When I asked Zach, he said, "Oh, those are just draft snapshots. Don't get too hung up on them." Hung up. Frozen. But that wasn't my fixation on numbers. It was his on words without substance. But I didn't give up. Kept analyzing, trying to sync metrics with results, running small pilot checks. In Slack, I asked questions, sometimes got likes, rarely answers. I thought, in time, they'll understand I'm not the enemy, but an ally. That I'm not trying to catch anyone lying, I just want to know what really works. Until one day at lunch, I overheard a senior say, "Alicia's intense, always with the charts." And someone laughed. Not maliciously, just like that. Like, the person who believes in data is almost a diagnosis. I smiled then, but inside it felt cold. Like someone checked a box next to my name, difficult. But I kept going, because if you don't ask questions, you're just decoration. And I came here to work, not to be background noise. A couple of weeks after that ill-fated Zoom meeting where I was compared to Congress for asking one question about $1.2 million, I started noticing something strange. After every message I sent in Slack, especially if I asked specific questions about metrics or how the funds for green initiatives were being spent, personal messages would start coming in, not from management, from colleagues. A DM from Laura in legal. "You're brave, but be careful, okay?" From Victor in ops. "I notice the numbers are weird too, but they don't like it when people dig." From Sandra in people team. "Nothing personal, but it's better to discuss such things directly. Slack is like an open mic." And these were good, smart people, but they all said this in whispers, as if I'd touched not money, but state secrets. After one particularly direct question, I was writing about strange discrepancies between spent and achieved in the sustainability reports Zach called me, didn't message, called. That was unusual. He started gently with, "You know, we appreciate your engagement." Then moved to phrases like, "You're smart, Alicia, very smart, but sometimes too intense." I asked, "Too intense, does that mean I'm wrong or just inconvenient?" He laughed, not a joyful laugh, more tired. "It's just that we're not a detective agency here. Our job is to do, not ask." Do, not ask. That phrase rang in my head. It sounded like a verdict. In the nonprofit sector where I used to work, there were more questions than answers, and they asked them not to accuse anyone, but because they were afraid to miss something important. Here, everything was built on a culture of outward calm, polite approval, an unspoken agreement to stay silent. The next day, I saw again how a report showing positive progress on CO2 reduction cited old data from 2021 in a new document, without a footnote. I exhaled. Opened Slack, and wrote in the general ESG team channel. Hi team, just double checking. The Q1 carbon report seems to use 2021 pilot data again. Is that a placeholder or intentional? Happy to help clarify in the doc. The reaction was nothing. No likes, no replies. Only an hour later, a message from Lorena in private. Please be mindful of tone and escalation. Let's sync offline. This wasn't hostility, it was fear. Everyone seemed to know something was wrong, but saying it out loud meant crossing an unspoken boundary. And the more questions I asked, the quieter the team became around me. On Friday, when I joined the Zoom meeting, I felt how the atmosphere had changed. I was that one. Too attentive, too confident, too Congress. But I wasn't trying to prove anything out of pride. I simply believed that if no one asks questions, then everything can get swept under the rug. And I didn't come here to be part of a facade. They thought I would forget. That $1.2 million per quarter was just a line in the budget, something to swallow with coffee and a bagel at the morning sink. But I was still the person who believed in spreadsheets, in numbers, in the trail they leave behind. Over the weekend, I gained access to the internal ESG initiative documents. We had a SharePoint folder with the password removed for employee engagement. Well, I got engaged. The first thing that caught my eye was an expense titled Sustainability Audiences, $600,000. Purpose, community engagement, eco-education, events. Contractor, Arcus Group. I Googled them. Arcus was a marketing agency, and the CEO was a former colleague of one of our board members. Their website was on a Squarespace template. 0 case studies, 0 photos. But on LinkedIn, mutual likes with our top executives. It got worse. A document labeled Green Leadership Incentives looked like an Excel sheet with manually entered numbers. $90,000 VP bonus. $12,000 eco-brand consulting, someone from that same Arcus. $15,000 discretionary award with no name attached. Discretionary award, a perfect way to pay without explaining what for. On Monday, I raised my hand during the ESG team Zoom meeting. I spoke calmly. I was going through the Q2 line items and had a few clarifying questions about the Arcus contract and the leadership incentive model. Pause. The VP of External Communications, Steve, leans into the mic and says, without looking up, Alicia, that's not your lane. Simple. Cold. Emotionless. Like, you're an analyst. Background support. Your job is charts and graphs, not power structures, not connections, not expenses. The rest of the meeting fell silent. Some looked away, some nodded, as if apologizing. And me? I said, copy that. And I backed up the entire dashboard. Dates, names, amounts, screenshots. Saved it on a flash drive, and separately in the cloud, just in case the access got accidentally deleted. Not for revenge, not for a scandal. Because corporate smiles fade quickly when reality shows up. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew one thing for sure. If you have access to the black box, don't leave it empty. Nashville. Team retreat. A word that always sounds like something fun but turned out to be a weekend full of presentations next to a cheese platter and some cliché team bonding games. We were sitting in a downtown restaurant. I remember the lighting. Warm, soft, almost deceptively cozy. Next to me, Josh, the product director, tall, with perfect teeth and a confident, tired tone. He ordered an old-fashioned and said casually, "Let's be real. We all know this ESG stuff is PR. Just ride the wave, smile, collect your paycheck." Someone nearby laughed. Someone raised a glass, as if he'd said something brilliant. And I just looked at him. Silently. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I realized this isn't an exception. It's the system. That's the real not your lane. Don't ask, don't dig. Don't mess with what brings investments and applause from the stands. Even if inside it's all just air and signs. A week after the retreat, I opened my laptop as usual, sipped coffee, checked tasks. Routine. And then a Slack ping. A message from the HR coordinator. "Hi, Alicia. Could you meet with us at 3 p.m. today to discuss a few updates regarding your current project status? Thanks." No details, just a soft phrase, like they were talking about the weather. I opened my work calendar. The project I'd been working on for the last 3 months was now marked paused for re-evaluation. No explanations, no feedback. Just switched off. I stared at the screen, saw my reflection in the black glass, and thought, just do what everyone else does, is a path that always ends in someone's silence. Today, mine. I closed the laptop and opened that very flash drive with all the data, screenshots, dates, just to remind myself, I'm not crazy, I just asked a question. And then the wave began, but not the kind you just ride, the kind you can't stop anymore. The room was bright, faceless, white walls, a glass door through which I saw someone rushing by with lunch in hand. Inside me, an HR woman named Sharon, and a legal person I'd never met before. Alicia, thanks for joining us. They spoke softly, almost kindly, but I immediately felt the chill, that corporate tone when the decision is already made. I sat down, opened my laptop just in case. They said nothing substantial, only phrases arranged like neutral formulas. You've been perceived as disruptive by multiple stakeholders. Your line of inquiry is not aligned with the company's current direction. This isn't disciplinary, but rather a compatibility concern. No examples. No references to violations. No chance to respond. Just questions are too inconvenient, and therefore, you are too inconvenient. It felt like they gently pushed me to the edge of the office table and nodded, you may leave. No angry scene, no drama, worse indifference. No emotions besides fatigue in their voices, as if this was not about a person, but about an unwanted file that no longer opens. So, we'll process your offboarding. You'll receive your final paycheck and COBRA options in the next few days. I looked at them. No anger, no tears, only clarity. They don't want questions. Then I need to ask one last publicly. 30 minutes later, I'm walking down the corridor, a box in my hands, charger, a mug that says data speaks louder, stickers, a few books. A colleague passes by, pretends not to notice. Some look with sympathy, some look away. Classic. But I don't feel defeated. On the contrary. Getting fired is a form of refusal, but this time I'm not the one refusing the company. The company refused the truth. And truth isn't something you just write off with not aligned. Because it has memory, archives, and I'm part of that memory. I step outside, the wind blows in San Francisco, the sun is bright, and I think, all right, then my last question will be public. In the form of a post, in the form of a table, in the form of a reality that can't be deleted. I was sitting at home on the floor, surrounded by papers, my laptop resting on the box with my things from the office. Next to me, a cup of cold coffee, an open LinkedIn tab, and a cursor blinking in an empty post field. At first, I just stared at it. To write or not? They had already fired me. I owed them nothing anymore. But, in fact, I still owed someone myself. Finally, I typed, I was let go for asking where our ESG money actually goes. Here's what I found before they cut my access. No anger, no hysteria, just facts. I attached 3 slides. A budget allocation chart, a network map showing connections between contractors and board members, and the dashboard I had saved in advance the very day I heard the VP say, "That's not your lane." Everything I posted was already publicly available. I didn't break any rules. I just gave structure and context. Then I hit post and went to pour myself some water. After 10 minutes, 12 likes. After an hour, 200. And then the real movement began. Comments flooded in, one after another. This is why no one trusts corporate ESG. You're not disruptive, you're necessary. I've asked the same questions, got silence too. Thank you for having the courage to show the numbers. People started messaging me privately. Employees from other companies, analysts, even a former regulator. We suspected this structure existed, you just made it visual. The most surprising thing wasn't the support, but the relief. As if this post gave others permission to start speaking out too. My former colleague, the same one who once whispered, "Be careful," wrote, Never seen anyone go from exit meeting to public impact this fast. Respect. I didn't respond to everything right away. I just observed. Not out of revenge, but for the reality that must exist beyond closed meetings. The next morning, my post was already quoted in the Impact Daily newsletter, and an HR person from another company reached out to discuss future collaboration. But the most important thing I realized was, I was fired for asking a question. But that question became the gateway to the truth. And truth, it turns out, loves simple words, clear numbers, and people who aren't afraid to speak them out loud. They thought everything would die down over the weekend. But on Monday morning, the first thing I saw was a push notification with a Bloomberg Green headline. Former ESG analyst raises red flags over budget transparency. My name in the very first paragraph, a quote from my LinkedIn post, the graphics I shared featured on Bloomberg's site. I froze. Not out of fear, but out of realization. Now the questions weren't coming to me anymore. The questions were aimed at them. Throughout the day, the news spread across industry outlets. TechCrunch, Fast Company, even a small YouTube channel focused on corporate ethics did a breakdown of my case. One article said, analysis conducted by a former ESG team member points to potential conflicts of interest in the contractor structure and funding. And then the real movement began. The company's stock, the very same stock part of our bonuses, dropped nearly 3%. Publicly, it was attributed to market fluctuations and climate agenda concerns. But in the evening, an independent corporate reporting commission issued a statement. We are opening an external review of sustainability-related expenditures following public concerns raised by a former employee. Everything was carefully worded, no direct accusations, no names. But on the company's official press release appeared the phrase, due to transparency concerns raised by a former employee. I read that sentence over and over. Because here it was the exact moment when the system, which had seemed deaf, was finally listening. At the office, when they fired me, everything sounded so final. Your approach doesn't align with our strategic goals. Now those strategic goals were under review. People asked me why I did it. I didn't do it for the noise. I simply asked the question no one wanted to hear. Now everyone is hearing it. And it no longer sounds like a challenge. It sounds like a necessity. When all this started, I didn't know where it would lead. I just asked a question. Now I'm in San Francisco, in a bright office in Soma, with a view of a city that can be both ruthless and inspiring at the same time. The company's name is ArborCore, a startup building ESG infrastructure not for pretty reports, but as a real, measurable service. Ironically, everything I was fired for became the reason they hired me here. My new job title, Director of Impact Accountability. Not a coordinator, not a specialist, a director. I don't just check things, I build a transparency system from scratch, from data to communication with investors. The first thing the CEO said when we sat down to talk, we didn't hire you because you made noise. We hired you because you were right, and we want to build with people like that. He looked at me calmly, no smile, but with respect. You asked the question we should have asked years ago. I remember sitting there with a cup of coffee and suddenly realizing, my questions aren't a nuisance, they're my capital. And that capital now works not just for me, it works for the product, the team, and the people who also want to make a difference. On my very first day, I met with an ESG designer, a product manager, and a data analyst. We discussed how to visualize impact, not just expenses. I proposed creating a transparency map showing every investment direction, down to the units of impact. $1, 1 tree, 1 vote, 1 reform. No one interrupted me. No one laughed. I was heard. That evening, I walked along the Embarcadero and thought, once I was told, your job is to do, not ask. But now I know questions are the job. If you don't ask, you're just servicing someone else's game. Now my game is my own. And I'm no longer afraid to be disruptive. 6 months later, I'm standing on the stage of a conference hall in the heart of New York at Impact Forward. There are hundreds of faces in the audience, but every single pair of eyes is on me. The spotlight doesn't blind me, it highlights that this moment is important not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been afraid to ask. I begin. Sometimes the last door isn't the end, it's a filter. A filter that separates those who simply work from those who truly want change. The room falls silent, and I see how many believe it. If your company can't handle simple questions, don't fool yourself. It's not a company, it's a set, an empty showcase. Real business is built on transparency, not silence. My voice carries the weight of 6 months of struggle and change, and also hope for a better future. The air is charged with genuine energy for change. At the end of my speech, the room erupts in applause. I smile. It's not just gratitude, it's recognition. I sit back at the table, open my laptop, and my eyes fall on a small sticker on the lid. Ask, even if they fire you. And I know this is my motto and my truth. The last question wasn't just the start of my story, but the beginning of a movement for honesty and accountability. And now I don't just ask questions, I get answers.